Close your eyes and let your mind drift back to the mist of time, back to a land of ancient mountains and emerald valleys, where dragons once soared through Celtic legends and princes fought for freedom beneath starlit skies. Tonight, we journey together through the entire tapestry of Welsh history, from the earliest whispers of civilization to the modern day. Let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you into peaceful slumber as we explore the beautiful, complex story of Cymru, Wales. Breathe deeply now, and imagine Wales as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago. Picture vast ice sheets slowly retreating, leaving behind a landscape of dramatic mountains, fertile valleys, and a coastline carved by ancient forces. The first people arrived here around 230,000 years ago, Neanderthals who left their mark in caves that still echo with mystery today. As your breathing slows and deepens, envision these early inhabitants discovering fire, creating the first tools, painting the walls of caves with ochre and charcoal. The Pont Newydd Cave in North Wales holds secrets from this distant past, whispers of humanity's earliest chapters written in stone and bone. Time flows like a gentle stream, carrying us forward to around 30,000 years ago, when modern humans began to call this land home. They were hunters and gatherers, following herds of reindeer and mammoth across landscapes that would one day become the rolling hills of Powys and the rugged peaks of Snowdonia. Let your mind wander through these ancient forests, where our ancestors lived in harmony with nature's rhythms. Around 4000 BC, something magical happened. These ancient people began to build, not just shelters, but monuments that would outlast empires. Picture yourself standing before the great burial chambers of Anglesey, the mysterious Bryn Celli Didiu, aligned with the summer solstice. Feel the warm sun on ancient stones as communities gather to honor their ancestors and mark the passage of seasons. The Bronze Age arrived like a golden dawn around 2500 BC. Imagine skilled craftsmen working copper and tin, creating beautiful tools and weapons that gleamed like captured sunlight. The great ore mines in Llandudno became one of the largest copper mines in the ancient world, its tunnels stretching deep into the earth like the roots of some enormous, sleeping tree. These Bronze Age peoples left us the most beautiful gold artifacts, torques and cups that seem to hold the very essence of sunlight. Close your eyes and picture these gleaming treasures being crafted by firelight, each hammer blow echoing across valleys that have remained unchanged for millennia. As the Bronze Age melted into the Iron Age around 800 BCE, the Celtic peoples arrived, bringing with them a rich culture that would become the very soul of Wales. These weren't conquering armies, but gradual waves of settlers, traders, and storytellers who blended with the existing population like streams joining a river. The Celts brought iron, stronger than bronze, and with it, a new way of life. Hill forts began to the landscape, like crowns upon the hills. Maiden Castle, Pendynas, these fortified settlements became centers of Celtic life, where druids taught ancient wisdom and bards sang epic tales that would echo through the centuries. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort as we explore the Celtic world that flourished in Wales for over 5 centuries. The Celtic tribes, the Silures in the south, the Ordovices in the center and north, the De Singli in the northeast, and the Demeti in the southwest, each had their own character, like different notes in a harmonious song. Picture a typical Celtic settlement on a misty morning. Round houses with conical thatched roofs nestled within protective walls, smoke rising gently from cooking fires. Women weaving colorful woolen cloth on wooden looms, their patterns inspired by the natural world around them. Spirals like unfurling ferns, knots like intertwining branches. The Celts were master metalworkers, and their artistry was breathtaking. Imagine touching a Celtic shield, its bronze surface decorated with flowing, organic patterns that seem to move and breathe. These weren't just weapons or tools, but expressions of a worldview that saw the sacred in every curve of river, every twist of vine. Central to Celtic society were the druids, priests, judges, teachers, and healers all combined into one. In sacred groves of oak trees, they preserved oral traditions stretching back centuries, teaching young people the laws, genealogies, and myths of their people. The druids believed that mistletoe growing on oak trees was especially sacred, and they harvested it with golden sickles under the light of the full moon. The Celtic year revolved around 4 great festivals. Samhain, at the end of October, when the veil between the worlds was thinnest and the spirits of ancestors could return to visit their families. Imbolc, at the beginning of February, celebrating the first stirrings of spring and the goddess Bridget. Beltane, in early May, when cattle were driven between twin fires for purification and fertility. And Lugnasad, in August, the harvest festival honoring the god Luff. Celtic women held a status that would have amazed the Romans. They could own property, choose their husbands, and even lead tribes into battle. Queen Boudica of Iceni is the most famous, but Wales had its own warrior queens whose names echo through legend, if not always through historical record. Trade connected Celtic Wales to the wider world. Merchants arrived from Ireland, Cornwall, and even the Mediterranean, bringing wine, olive oil, and exotic goods in exchange for Welsh gold, silver, and copper. At port along the Welsh coast, you might have heard a dozen languages on any given day. Celtic dialects, Latin, Phoenician, and others carried on sea winds. The Celt spiritual world was animistic. They believed that every hill, river, grove, and stone had its own spirit. This connection to the land runs so deep in Welsh culture that it still influences the country today. Sacred sites were scattered across the landscape. Springs with healing powers, hilltops where the gods dwelt, caves that led to the other world. As you settle deeper into relaxation, imagine the year 78 CE. The Romans had conquered much of Britain, but Wales remained fiercely independent. The governor Aeneas Julius Agricola stood at the edge of the known world, gazing across the Menai Strait toward Anglesey, Mona to the Romans, the sacred heart of Celtic resistance. The attack on Anglesey was devastating. Roman legions crossed the treacherous waters and destroyed the druids' sacred groves, burning centuries of accumulated wisdom. Yet even this blow didn't break Welsh resistance. The Ordovices in the mountains continued their guerrilla warfare, using their knowledge of hidden valleys and secret paths to harass the Roman legions. But gradually, like water wearing away stone, Roman influence began to seep into Welsh life. They built their great fortress at Caerleon, Isca to them, one of only 3 permanent legionary bases in Britain. Picture this mighty fortress in its prime. Massive stone walls, barracks for 5,000 soldiers, an amphitheater that could seat the entire legion, and baths fed by ingenious aqueducts. The Romans brought more than military might. They brought a new way of life. Towns began to grow around their forts. Caerwent, Venice Illyrium, with its impressive walls that still stand today, Carmarthen Moridinum, built at the head of a tidal river perfect for trade. In these towns, Celtic and Roman cultures began to blend like watercolors running together on parchment. Roman roads carved straight lines across the Welsh landscape, ignoring the Celtic preference for following natural contours. Watling Street, Sarnhelen, and others connected Wales to the wider Roman world. Along these roads traveled not just soldiers and officials, but merchants, craftsmen, and ideas that would change Wales forever. Some Welsh aristocrats embraced Roman ways, sending their sons to be educated in Latin and Greek, adopting Roman dress and customs. Others retreated deeper into the mountains, keeping alive the old ways, the old stories, the old gods. Both responses were part of Wales' complex relationship with outside influence, a pattern that would repeat throughout its history. The Romans brought Christianity to Wales, though it spread slowly at first. The earliest Christian communities were small groups meeting in secret, sharing bread and wine while Roman soldiers patrolled the streets outside. But by the 4th century, Christianity had taken deep root, blending with Celtic traditions to create something uniquely Welsh. In 383 CE, a Spanish-born Roman general named Magnus Maximus, known to the Welsh as Maxim Ledig, was proclaimed emperor by his troops in Britain. Though his rebellion ultimately failed, he became a legendary figure in Welsh tradition, the foreign emperor who fell in love with a Welsh princess and helped establish the royal dynasties of medieval Wales. As the Roman legions marched away in 410 CE, called back to defend the crumbling empire, Wales entered what historians once called the Dark Ages. But there was nothing dark about this period in Wales. It was a time of flowering Christianity, magnificent poetry, and the emergence of the Welsh identity as we know it today. Let your breathing slow as we explore this sacred time. Celtic Christianity was different from the Roman version. More mystical, more connected to nature, more willing to embrace the old Celtic love of learning and story. Welsh saints wandered the countryside, establishing small churches and monasteries that became centers of learning and refuge. Saint David Dewi Sant is the most beloved, but there were hundreds of others. Saint Illtyd founded the great monastery of Llaniltyd, where students came from across Europe to study. Saint Tylo traveled to Jerusalem and brought back relics and wisdom. Saint Winfried Gwenfrey became associated with healing springs that still draw pilgrims today. These early Welsh monasteries were unlike anything in continental Europe. They were more like Celtic settlements than Roman institutions. Clusters of small stone cells around a simple church, often located in beautiful, remote locations that spoke to the Celtic love of wild places. The monasteries preserved not just Christian learning, but also the old Celtic traditions, the genealogies, the laws, the stories that might otherwise have been lost forever. This was the age when the Welsh language truly began to take shape, evolving from the various Celtic dialects into something recognizably Welsh. The earliest Welsh poetry dates from this period. Powerful, emotional verse that speaks of heroes and losses, love and loyalty, the beauty of the natural world, and the pain of exile. The old Celtic kingdoms began to coalesce into the medieval Welsh principalities. Gwynedd in the north, Powys in the center, Deheubarth in the south. Each had its own royal dynasty, its own traditions, its own claim to legitimacy stretching back to legendary founders. The rulers of Gwynedd claimed descent from Cyneda, a war leader who came from southern Scotland to drive Irish raiders from Wales. The princes of Powys traced their lineage to Vortigern, the king who allegedly invited the Anglo-Saxons to Britain. These weren't unified kingdoms in the modern sense, but rather complex networks of relationships held together by kinship, loyalty, and mutual interest. A prince might rule directly over only a small area, but command the allegiance of dozens of lesser chiefs and hundreds of warriors who would rally to his banner in time of need. This was also the age of Arthur, not necessarily the historical Arthur, who may have been a Romano-British war leader fighting the Anglo-Saxon advance, but the Arthur of Welsh legend and story. The earliest Arthurian tales are Welsh, full of magic and wonder, of heroes with unpronounceable names questing through a landscape that is recognizably Wales. These stories were told around fires in royal halls, preserving cultural memory in the amber of narrative. The Welsh developed a sophisticated legal system during this period, codified in the laws of Llywelyn the Good, who ruled much of Wales in the 10th century. These laws were remarkably progressive for their time, giving women significant rights and emphasizing compensation rather than punishment for crimes. They remained in force in parts of Wales for centuries, a testament to their wisdom and practicality. As the 9th century dawned, a new threat appeared on the horizon, literally. Viking longships, their dragon prows cutting to the Irish Sea, brought terror and transformation to Welsh shores. But as your body relaxes and your mind drifts, remember that even these times of violence contain seeds of change and growth. The Vikings first came as raiders, striking coastal monasteries and settlements before disappearing back to sea. The monastery on Bardsey Island, one of the most sacred sites in Wales, was attacked repeatedly. But gradually, some Vikings began to settle, particularly around the coasts and islands, bringing with them new skills in shipbuilding, navigation, and trade. The Viking raids forced the Welsh kingdoms to become more unified in their defense. Rhodri the Great, of Gwynedd successfully fought off Viking attacks and expanded his territory to include much of Wales. His victory over the Viking leader Gorm in 856 CE became the stuff of legend, celebrated in poetry and song. But the most transformative figure of this period was Llywelyn, Rhodri's grandson, who ruled from about 920 to 950 CE. Llywelyn was unusual among Welsh rulers in that he maintained peaceful relations with the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of England, even acknowledging the overlordship of Athelstan. This allowed him to focus on internal development rather than constant warfare. Llywelyn undertook a pilgrimage to Rome, the first Welsh king known to have done so. He returned with new ideas about governance and law, which he incorporated into his great legal code. The laws of Llywelyn reflected a sophisticated understanding of justice, with detailed provisions for everything from the status of women to the proper compensation for various types of injury. The period also saw the flourishing of Welsh literature and learning. The Black Book of Carmarthen, one of the earliest collections of Welsh poetry, contains works from this era that still have the power to move readers today. These poems speak of heroic deeds and tragic losses, of the beauty of Wales and the sorrow of those forced to leave it. Trade flourished during the more peaceful periods. Welsh merchants traveled to Ireland, Scotland, and even Iceland, carrying Welsh woolen cloth, metalwork, and other goods. In return, they brought back luxury items, new ideas, and stories from distant lands that enriched Welsh culture. The church continued to be a major force in Welsh society, but it was changing. The old Celtic traditions were gradually being replaced by continental practices, and Wales was slowly being brought into mainstream of European Christianity. New monasteries were founded following continental rules, and Welsh clerics began to travel to European centers of learning. This period also saw the emergence of the great Welsh genealogies, complex family trees that trace the descent of noble families back to legendary founders. These genealogies weren't just historical records. They were political documents that established claims to land and authority. They connected contemporary rulers to the heroes of legend, giving their rule a sacred legitimacy that transcended mere military power. The year 1066 changed everything in Britain, but its effects took time to reach Wales. As you sink deeper into comfort, imagine the Norman conquest not as a single battle, but as a slow tide that gradually reshaped the political landscape of medieval Britain. William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings didn't immediately threaten Wales, but it set in motion forces that would transform the country forever. The Normans were a different kind of enemy than the Welsh had faced before, disciplined, organized, and possessed of new military technologies that made traditional Welsh tactics less effective. The Norman advance into Wales began in the 1070s, not as a planned conquest, but as a result of individual Norman lords seeking to carve out territories for themselves. These marcher lords, as they came to be called, built a chain of castles along the Welsh border and gradually pushed deeper into Welsh territory. But the Welsh didn't simply submit. For over 2 centuries, they fought a complex, shifting war against Norman expansion. Sometimes they won spectacular victories, like Gruffudd ap Llywelyn's conquest of the English border stronghold of Hereford in 1055, or the great victory at the Battle of Llywelyn Carn in 1081 that established Gruffudd ap Cynan as King of Gwynedd. Gruffudd ap Cynan's life reads like a medieval adventure story. Born in Ireland to a Gwynedd prince and an Irish mother, he spent his youth as an exile before returning to claim his inheritance. Captured by the Normans, he escaped from prison in Chester and fled back to Ireland. He returned again and again, sometimes victorious, sometimes defeated, until finally establishing himself as one of the most successful Welsh rulers of the age. The 12th century saw the rise of the greatest of all Welsh rulers, Llywelyn ap Iorwerth, known as Llywelyn the Great, from his power base in Gwynedd. He gradually extended his authority over much of Wales, using a combination of military skill, political cunning, and diplomatic marriage to build what was effectively the first unified Welsh state. Llywelyn married Joan, the illegitimate daughter of King John of England, in a political alliance that gave him protection from English interference while he consolidated his power in Wales. He built new castles, reformed the law, encouraged trade and agriculture, and patronized poets and scholars who celebrated Welsh culture and history. Under Llywelyn and his successors, Welsh culture flourished as never before. The court poets, known as Goganffyrdd, created sophisticated verse that combined traditional Welsh poetic forms with new influences from continental Europe. They celebrated the deeds of their patrons while preserving the memory of ancient heroes and the beauty of the Welsh landscape. This was also the great age of Welsh castle building. Llywelyn and other Welsh princes built mighty fortresses like Castell y Bear and Dalbadarn that could stand comparison with any Norman stronghold. These weren't just military installations, but symbols of Welsh independence and achievements in stone and mortar. The Cistercian monasteries that spread across Wales during this period brought new agricultural techniques and architectural styles. Valley Crucis, Strait of Florida, Tintern. These great religious houses became centers of learning and economic activity, their monks draining marshes, breeding better livestock, and copying manuscripts that preserved Welsh culture. But the Golden Age couldn't last forever. The death of Llywelyn the Great in 1240 was followed by a period of civil war between his sons. England, meanwhile, was growing stronger and more unified under Henry III and then Edward I. The stage was being set for the final confrontation between Welsh independence and English overlordship. As your breathing deepens and slows, let's follow the tragic but heroic story of Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, the last native prince of Wales. His story is one of triumph and tragedy, of a dream of Welsh independence that came tantalizingly close to reality before being crushed by the superior resources of the English crown. Llywelyn ap Gruffudd inherited a divided kingdom in 1246, sharing power with his brothers in the traditional Welsh manner. But unlike his predecessors, he had grander ambitions. He dreamed not just of ruling Gwynedd, but creating a truly unified Wales that could stand as an equal among the kingdoms of Europe. Through a combination of military skill and political acumen, Llywelyn gradually extended his authority. He defeated his brothers and rivals, formed alliances with other Welsh princes, and even allied with rebellious English barons against Henry III. By the 1260s, he controlled more Wales than any ruler since the Romans. In 1267, Llywelyn achieved the ultimate recognition of his success, the Treaty of Montgomery, in which Henry III acknowledged him as Prince of Wales and overlord of the other Welsh rulers. For the first time in centuries, Wales had a single recognized ruler, and that ruler was acknowledged by the English crown as holding his title by right, not by grace. But this triumph contained the seeds of future disaster. The treaty made Llywelyn a feudal vassal of the English crown, obligated to pay homage and tribute. When Edward I became king in 1272, he had very different ideas about the relationship between England and Wales than his father had held. Edward I, Longshanks, the Hammer of the Scots, was one of medieval Europe's most formidable rulers. Unlike previous English kings, who were often distracted by continental possessions or domestic troubles, Edward focused his considerable abilities on the task of creating a unified Britain under English rule. The final crisis began over what seemed like a minor matter: Llywelyn's refusal to attend Edward's coronation or pay the homage required by the Treaty of Montgomery. But behind this diplomatic dispute lay deeper issues of sovereignty and independence that neither ruler was willing to compromise on. Llywelyn had fallen in love with and married Eleanor de Montfort, daughter of the rebellious English Baron Simon de Montfort. This marriage was both a love match and a political statement. Llywelyn was allying himself with the enemies of the English crown and asserting his independence from Edward's control. The war that began in 1277 was unlike the previous conflicts between Wales and England. Edward approached it with systematic thoroughness, using superior resources and logistics to slowly strangle Welsh resistance. He built a chain of mighty castles, Flint, Rhuddlan, Builth Wells, that served as basis for further operations. Faced with overwhelming force, Llywelyn was compelled to submit in 1277, surrendering most of his conquests and accepting a much-reduced principality. But the peace was uneasy, and tensions continued to build. In 1282, Llywelyn's brother Dafydd launched a new rebellion, and reluctantly, Llywelyn joined him. This final war was brief but decisive. Edward's forces, now experienced in Welsh warfare and supported by an extensive network of castles, gradually closed in on the remaining centers of Welsh resistance. Llywelyn himself was killed in a skirmish near Builth Wells in December 1282, and with his death, the dream of an independent Wales died too. Let your mind drift gently through the years that followed Llywelyn's death, a time when Wales struggled to maintain its identity under foreign rule. The Statute of Rhuddlan in 1284 formally incorporated Wales into the English legal and administrative system, but could not incorporate the Welsh spirit of independence. Edward I's castles, Carnarvon, Conwy, Harlech, Beaumaris, rose like stone giants across the Welsh landscape. These weren't just military fortifications, but symbols of conquest, designed to overawe the Welsh population and demonstrate the permanence of English rule. Yet even as they were being built, they became part of the Welsh story, inspiring legends and folklore that kept alive a memory of resistance. The birth of Edward II at Carnarvon Castle in 1284 was later used to create the legend that Edward I promised the Welsh a prince born in Wales, who could speak no word of English. Whether or not the story is true, it reflects the Welsh hope that even under foreign rule, their distinctive identity might be preserved. But preservation of Welsh culture required constant effort. The Welsh language was displaced from official use, replaced by English and Latin in government and law courts. Welsh legal traditions, codified in the laws of Hywel Dda, were suppressed in favor of English common law. Many Welsh landowners lost their estates, which were granted to English and Norman settlers. Yet Welsh culture found ways to survive and even flourish underground. The tradition of court poetry continued, but now the poets sang not of victorious princes, but of lost heroes and vanished glories. Their verse became a repository of cultural memory, keeping alive the stories and values that official culture sought to suppress. The great Welsh literary work known as the Mabinogion, which collected ancient Celtic tales and myths, was compiled during this period. These stories, of Pwyll and Rhiannon, of Branwen and Bendigeidfran, of Math and Gwydion, preserved a vision of Wales that stretched back to the time of legend, offering an alternative to the harsh realities of conquest. Religious life also provided a space for Welsh identity to survive. The Welsh saints continued to be venerated. Pilgrimage routes to Welsh holy sites remained active, and Welsh religious poetry flourished. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, ironically helped preserve Welsh culture by weakening the English colonial apparatus and creating opportunities for Welsh people to reclaim positions of influence. Economic changes were transforming Wales as well. The English introduced new agricultural techniques and encouraged trade, leading to growth of market towns like Denbigh and Newtown. Welsh became highly prized in European markets, bringing prosperity to some regions while disrupting traditional ways of life in others. But the most significant change was social. The old Welsh system of kinship-based land tenure was gradually replaced by English feudalism. This created a new class of Welsh gentry who were neither fully Welsh nor fully English, but something in between. People who spoke Welsh at home but conducted business in English, who remembered the old stories but lived by the new laws. By the late 14th century, tensions were building toward a new crisis. Welsh resentment at their second-class status in their own country was growing, while economic pressures and administrative failures were creating widespread discontent. The stage was being set for the most remarkable figure in Welsh history, a man who would come closer than anyone before or since the creating an independent Welsh nation. Close your eyes now and travel back to the year 1400, to a Wales simmering with discontent and ready for a leader who could channel his frustrations into action. That leader was Owain Glyndŵr, a descendant of the princes of Powys who had served in the English Parliament and fought in English armies, but who retained a deep love for Welsh culture and a burning resentment of Welsh oppression. The rebellion began, as many great events do, with a small dispute. Glyndŵr's English neighbor, Lord Grey of Ruthin, had seized some of his land. When Glyndŵr appealed to the English courts, his case was dismissed. In September 1400, frustrated by the failure of legal remedies, he raised his banner and proclaimed himself Prince of Wales. What followed was the most sustained and successful Welsh revolt against English rule in history. Glyndŵr possessed qualities that previous rebel leaders had lacked. He was educated, diplomatically sophisticated, and had a vision of Welsh independence that went far beyond simple resistance to foreign rule. The rebellion spread like wildfire across Wales. English colonists fled to the safety of the great castles, while Welsh people from all walks of life rallied to Glyndŵr's banner. Students abandoned Oxford and Cambridge to join his cause. Welsh soldiers deserted from English armies. Even Welsh servants in English households slipped away to join the rebellion. Glyndŵr's greatest triumph came in 1404 when he captured Harlech Castle, one of Edward I's mightiest fortresses. He made it his capital and held his own parliament there, summoning representatives from all over Wales to plan for the future of an independent Welsh nation. This wasn't just a military rebellion, but a cultural renaissance. Glyndŵr planned to establish 2 universities in Wales, to make Welsh the language of law and administration, and to create an independent Welsh church under the authority of the Pope in Avignon rather than the English-dominated church in Canterbury. French and Scottish allies provided support, recognizing Glyndŵr as a legitimate ruler and sending supplies and reinforcements. For a few glorious years, it seemed as if the dream of Welsh independence might actually be realized. Glyndŵr controlled most of Wales and had international recognition as its legitimate ruler. But ultimately, the rebellion failed. English resources were simply too great, and Welsh geographical disadvantages too significant. Henry IV and later Henry V systematically recaptured the Welsh strongholds, using the same tactics of siege and starvation that Edward I had employed more than a century earlier. By 1409, Harlech Castle had fallen, and Llywelyn wife and daughters were prisoners in the Tower of London. Llywelyn himself disappeared into the Welsh mountains, becoming a figure of legend rather than history. Some say he died in hiding, others that he lived on for years, a hunted fugitive in his own land. The failure of the Llywelyn rebellion marked the end of medieval Welsh independence movements. Never again would Welsh leaders attempt to create a separate Welsh state through military means. But Llywelyn's legacy lived on in Welsh culture and memory, inspiring future generations of Welsh nationalists and keeping alive the dream of Welsh self-determination. As you drift deeper into relaxation, let's explore a remarkable reversal of fortune. In 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth, a Welsh army led by a man with Welsh royal blood defeated the English king and claimed the throne of England. Henry Tudor's victory transformed Wales from a conquered province into a partner in the British enterprise. Henry VII's grandfather, Owain Tudor, had been a humble Welsh squire who caught the eye of Henry V's widow, Catherine of Valois. Their secret marriage scandalized the English court, but produced a dynasty that would rule England for over a century. The Red Dragon of Wales joined the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster as symbols of a new Tudor monarchy. Under the Tudors, Wales underwent a transformation more profound than any military conquest could have achieved. The Acts of Union of 1536 and 1542 formally incorporated Wales into England, abolishing Welsh law and making English the only language of administration and justice. Yet paradoxically, this legal union created opportunities for Welsh advancement that hadn't existed under direct English rule. Welsh gentry families seized the new opportunities eagerly. They sent their sons to English universities, acquired English manners and dress, and began to see themselves as British rather than simply Welsh. The old aristocratic tradition that had sustained Welsh independence was gradually transformed into something new, a Welsh contribution to British greatness. This period saw the first flowering of Welsh scholarship and education since the medieval period. William Salisbury published the first printed book in Welsh in 1547, and in 1588, William Morgan completed his translation of the Bible into Welsh, a work of such literary excellence that it established the Welsh language for centuries to come and probably saved it from extinction. The Protestant Reformation came to Wales through English policy rather than popular demand, but had unexpected consequences for Welsh culture. Protestant emphasis on reading scripture in the vernacular led to increased literacy in Welsh, while the dissolution of the monasteries removed one of the last bastions of separate Welsh identity, while simultaneously releasing resources for new cultural ventures. Welsh poets during this period faced a difficult choice. The traditional system of noble patronage was disappearing as the Welsh gentry became increasingly anglicized. Some poets adapted by learning English forms and themes, while others retreated into increasingly conservative traditionalism. But the finest, like William Llywelyn, managed to bridge both worlds, creating poetry that honored Welsh traditions while engaging with Renaissance learning. Economic changes were equally profound. Wales remained primarily agricultural, but new industries were beginning to develop. Coal mining expanded in the south. Ironworking grew in areas with abundant wood for charcoal, and Welsh will continue to find markets throughout Europe. Market towns grew larger and more prosperous, connecting Wales ever more closely to English and European commercial networks. The Tudor period also saw the beginnings of Welsh immigration to the New World. Welsh settlers participated in the colonization of Virginia and later established their own communities in Pennsylvania and other colonies. These Welsh Americans maintained their language and culture for generations, creating a Welsh diaspora that would later play an important role in Welsh cultural revival. By the end of the Tudor period, Wales had been transformed from a conquered province into an integral part of a growing British Empire. The old independent Welsh kingdoms were gone forever, but Welsh people were now contributing to enterprises that spanned the globe. The question for the future was whether this integration would preserve or destroy Welsh distinctiveness. As we move into the later centuries, Let your mind drift through a remarkable period of Welsh cultural awakening. The 18th century brought what historians call the Welsh Renaissance. Not a political revival, but something perhaps more important. A renaissance of learning, literature, and national consciousness that would shape modern Welsh identity. The catalyst for this revival came from an unexpected source, London. Welsh migrants to the capital, successful in business and the professions, began to look back with nostalgia and pride to their homeland's ancient culture. The Honourable Society of Cymru, founded in London in 1751, brought together wealthy Welsh exiles who sponsored research into Welsh history, literature, and antiquities. The most remarkable figure of this renaissance was Iolo Morgan Edward Williams, a stonemason and poet from Glamorgan who combined genuine scholarship with breathtaking literary forgery. Iolo claimed to have discovered ancient Welsh manuscripts that revealed a continuous tradition of bardic learning stretching back to the druids. Much of what he claimed to have found he had actually created himself. But his forgeries were so skillfully done and so appealing to contemporary taste that they shaped Welsh cultural identity for generations. Iolo invented the modern Eisteddfod, the competitive festival of Welsh poetry and music that became central to Welsh cultural life. The first modern national Eisteddfod was held on Primrose Hill in London in 1792, with Iolo presiding over ceremonies that he claimed were ancient but were actually his own recent invention. The Gorset of Bards, with its elaborate rituals and druidic symbolism, was pure Iolo, but it captured something essential about Welsh cultural aspirations. This cultural revival coincided with religious awakening. Methodist preachers like Daniel Rowland and William Williams Pantycelyn sparked a religious revival that swept across Wales, bringing emotional, experiential Christianity to people who had found the established church cold and irrelevant. The Methodists preached in Welsh, sang in Welsh, and created a popular literature in Welsh that reached ordinary people as scholarly works could not. Williams Pantycelyn's hymns, like Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer, became central to Welsh identity. Sung at rugby matches and political rallies, as well as in chapels, they expressed a Welsh spirituality that was both deeply personal and intensely communal. The Industrial Revolution was beginning to transform Wales in ways that no one could have predicted. Coal deposits in South Wales, which had been known since Roman times, suddenly became enormously valuable as Britain's industries demanded more fuel. Ironworks at Dowlais, Cyfarthfa, and other sites made Wales a crucial part of Britain's emerging industrial economy. These economic changes brought social disruption, but also new opportunities. Welsh farmers' sons could find work in the mines and ironworks, earning wages that allowed them to support families and educate their children. Methodist chapels provided not just religious instruction, but also basic education in Welsh, creating a literate working class that would become the backbone of modern Welsh culture. The American Revolution had a profound impact on Wales. Despite its distance from the conflict, many Welsh settlers in Pennsylvania and other colonies supported independence, while others remained loyal to Britain. The war disrupted trade and forced Wales to look for new economic opportunities, accelerating industrial development. But perhaps more importantly, the American Revolution introduced new ideas about democracy, individual rights, and national self-determination that would influence Welsh political thinking for generations. Welsh radicals began to draw parallels between American complaints against British rule and Welsh grievances against English dominance. As the 19th century dawned, Wales was transforming from a rural, agricultural society into one of the world's great industrial regions. Let your mind wander through the valleys of South Wales, where the landscape was changing as dramatically as anywhere on Earth. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and ancient ways of life disappeared within a single generation. The catalyst was coal, not just any coal, but the unique anthracite and high-quality bituminous coal found in the South Wales valleys. This coal burned hotter and cleaner than most others, making it perfect for the steam engines that were revolutionizing transportation and industry. Welsh coal powered the Royal Navy, heated London homes, and fueled factories across Britain and beyond. The social transformation was equally dramatic. Thousands of people moved from rural areas to the new industrial towns. Merthyr Tydfil, which became the largest town in Wales. Rhondda, where entire valleys were transformed by mining. Newport and Cardiff, which grew into major ports serving the coal trade. These migrants brought Welsh language and culture with them, creating industrial communities that were thoroughly Welsh in character despite their modern occupations. But industrialization also brought new problems. Working conditions in the mines and ironworks were dangerous. Housing was often overcrowded and unsanitary, and the traditional social structures that had maintained order in rural Wales were strained to the breaking point. The result was periodic explosions of social unrest that shocked the British establishment. The Merthyr Uprising of 1831 was the most serious. Economic depression and political frustration erupted into open rebellion when workers seized control of the town, raising the red flag, the first time the symbol of revolution was used in Britain. The uprising was suppressed by military force, but it demonstrated that industrial Wales was developing a political consciousness quite different from rural, agricultural Wales. These social tensions found expression in new forms of Welsh culture. The industrial working class created their own literature, music, and political organizations that were distinctively Welsh, but also connected to broader movements for social reform. The Welsh language, rather than disappearing in the face of industrialization, found new life in the chapels, schools, and political movements of industrial Wales. Education became a central concern. The famous Blue Book's inquiry of 1847 sparked outrage across Wales when English commissioners criticized Welsh education, language, and culture in terms that seemed designed to humiliate and demean. The report was dubbed the treachery of the Blue Books, and the anger it provoked helped unite Welsh people of different classes and regions in defense of their culture. The response was characteristically Welsh, practical, determined, and focused on self-improvement. Welsh communities established their own schools, many of them connected to Methodist and other nonconformist chapels. These schools taught in Welsh as well as English, providing education that respected Welsh culture while preparing students for success in the broader British world. By the 1860s, Wales had achieved something unique in European history, a working-class culture that was both highly literate and strongly rooted in its own language and traditions. Welsh miners and ironworkers read Welsh poetry, attended Welsh lectures, and participated in Welsh cultural competitions with enthusiasm that amazed middle-class observers. The Eisteddfod tradition, revived and romanticized by Iolo Morganwg, became central to this new industrial Welsh culture. Local Eisteddfodau were held in mining valleys and industrial towns, celebrating not just traditional poetry and music, but also new forms of expression that reflected the realities of industrial life. This period also saw the emergence of Welsh political consciousness as a distinct force in British politics. Welsh MPs began to act as a group on issues affecting Wales, particularly education and religious equality. The Liberal Party found strong support in Wales, especially among nonconformists who resented the privileges of the established Anglican Church. As your breathing deepens, let's explore the period when Wales found its political voice and began to demand equality within the British system. The late 19th century was a time of democratic awakening, when ordinary Welsh people gained a vote and began to use it to transform their society. The key figure in this transformation was David Lloyd George, a young lawyer from rural Wales who combined passionate Welsh patriotism with radical liberalism. Lloyd George's early career was built on defending Welsh farmers against English landlords and Welsh nonconformists against Anglican privilege. His oratory, delivered in both Welsh and English, could move audiences to tears or fury with equal ease. The 1880s and 1890s saw a series of campaigns that established Wales as a distinct political force. The Campaign for Welsh Disestablishment, ending the privileged status of the Anglican Church in Wales, united Welsh liberals behind a distinctively Welsh cause. The Welsh Education Act of 1889 created a national system of secondary education that was more generous and democratic than anything available in England. These political victories were won by a new kind of Welsh leadership. Men like Lloyd George, who were products of Welsh elementary schools and Methodist chapels rather than English public schools and Anglican parishes. They spoke for a Wales that was industrial and democratic, but still proudly Welsh in language and culture. The period also saw the maturation of Welsh industrial culture. The South Wales coal field reached its peak production, employing over 270,000 miners by 1920. These weren't just workers but members of highly organized communities with their own libraries, choirs, brass bands, and political organizations. Welsh mining valleys developed a culture that was both intensely local and internationally aware, as miners followed political developments around the world and welcomed radical speakers from many countries. Women played an increasingly important role in Welsh public life during this period. The temperance movement, which sought to limit the sale of alcohol, was largely led by Welsh women, who saw drink as a threat to family life and social order. These women developed skills in organization and public speaking that they later applied to campaigns for women's suffrage and other causes. The First World War brought both tragedy and opportunity to Wales. Welsh regiments fought with distinction in France and Gallipoli, suffering terrible casualties but also proving their courage and loyalty. At home, Welsh industries boomed as they supplied the British war effort with coal, steel, and manufactured goods. But the war also accelerated social change. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Trade unions grew stronger, and traditional social hierarchies began to break down. Lloyd George became Prime Minister in 1916, the first Welsh person to hold the office, and used his position to promote Welsh interests while leading Britain to victory. The end of the war brought both celebration and disillusionment. Wales had contributed enormously to the British victory, but many Welsh people wondered what they had gained in return. Economic depression hit the Welsh industrial areas particularly hard, and emigration increased as young Welsh people sought opportunities elsewhere. Yet this period also saw important cultural developments. The National Eisteddfod established itself as an annual celebration of Welsh culture that attracted participants from around the world. Welsh literature flourished, with poets like R.S. Thomas beginning to explore what it meant to be Welsh in the modern world. The University of Wales, established in 1893, created new opportunities for Welsh scholarship and research. Most importantly, the democratic reforms of this period established the principle that Wales had a right to be different within the British system. Welsh people had won the vote, used it effectively, and proven that they could be both proudly Welsh and fully British. This achievement would provide the foundation for all future developments in Welsh politics and culture. As the 1920s arrived, Wales faced a complex challenge: how to maintain its identity and prosperity in a rapidly changing world. Let your mind drift through this period of contrasts, when Wales experienced both cultural renaissance and economic depression, both growing confidence and increasing anxiety about the future. The interwar period began with hope, but soon turned difficult. The post-war economic boom collapsed in the early 1920s, hitting Wales's industrial areas particularly hard. Coal exports declined as other countries developed their own mines and industries. The great steelworks of South Wales reduced production, and unemployment rose to levels that would have been unthinkable before the war. Yet, paradoxically, this period of economic difficulty also saw a flowering of Welsh culture. The Welsh language, which some had feared would disappear in the face of industrialization and urbanization, found new champions and new forms of expression. The BBC began broadcasting in Welsh in 1923, bringing Welsh language programming to homes across Wales for the first time. Saunders Lewis emerged as the most important Welsh intellectual of the 20th century, a playwright, critic, and political theorist who argued passionately for preservation of Welsh culture and the Welsh language. Lewis helped found Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, in 1925, creating the first political party dedicated specifically to Welsh independence. The party's early years were marked more by cultural activism than political success. In 1936, Lewis and two colleagues set fire to construction equipment at a proposed RAF bombing school on the Llywelyn Peninsula, an area of great cultural significance to Welsh speakers. Their trial and imprisonment became a cause célèbre that brought national attention to Welsh cultural concerns. This period also saw important developments in Welsh education and scholarship. The University of Wales expanded its research into Welsh history, literature, and culture, while a new generation of Welsh writers began to explore modern themes in both Welsh and English. Dylan Thomas, born in Swansea in 1914, will become the most internationally famous Welsh writer of the 20th century, though his relationship with his Welsh identity remained complex throughout his life. The party's early years were marked more by cultural activism than political success. In 1936, Lewis and two colleagues set fire to construction equipment at a proposed RAF bombing school on the Llywelyn Peninsula, an area of great cultural significance to Welsh speakers. Their trial and imprisonment became a cause célèbre that brought national attention to Welsh cultural concerns. This period also saw important developments in Welsh education and scholarship. The University of Wales expanded its research into Welsh history, literature, and culture, while a new generation of Welsh writers began to explore modern themes in both Welsh and English. Dylan Thomas, born in Swansea in 1914, will become the most internationally famous Welsh writer of the 20th century, though his relationship with his Welsh identity remained complex throughout his life. The economic depression of the 1930s hit Wales with particular severity. Unemployment in some Welsh communities reached 70%. An entire valley seemed to empty as young people emigrated to England, America, Australia, and other countries in search of work. The hunger marches of unemployed Welsh workers to London became symbols of economic distress throughout Britain. Yet Welsh communities showed remarkable resilience during these difficult years. The tradition of mutual self-help, rooted in Methodist culture and trade union organization, helped people survive the worst effects of the Depression. Libraries, choirs, and educational classes continued to flourish even in the most impoverished areas, maintaining cultural life when economic life had almost collapsed. The Spanish Civil War brought new political awareness to Wales. Welsh volunteers joined the international brigades to fight against fascism, motivated by a combination of socialist politics and identification with another small nation struggling for independence. The experience of these Welsh volunteers in Spain broadened their political horizons and connected Welsh nationalism to international anti-fascist movements. The Second World War transformed Wales once again. Welsh industrial areas, which had been depressed throughout the 1930s, suddenly found themselves at the center of the British war effort. Coal mines worked at full capacity, steelworks expanded production, and new factories were built to produce munitions and other military supplies. The war brought both tragedy and opportunity. German bombers targeted Welsh cities. Cardiff, Swansea, and Newport all suffered significant damage during the Blitz. But the war effort also created new jobs, brought new technologies to Wales, and demonstrated once again the importance of Welsh contributions to British success. Welsh culture adapted to wartime conditions with characteristic creativity. Eisteddfodol continued even during the war years, though on a smaller scale. Welsh language broadcasting expanded as the BBC recognized the importance of maintaining morale in Welsh-speaking communities. And Welsh writers began to explore the impact of modern warfare on traditional Welsh communities and values. The end of the war in 1945 found Wales changed once again. The experience of total war had accelerated social and economic changes that had been building for decades. The question now was whether post-war Wales could build on its wartime achievements to create a more prosperous and confident future. As the post-war world began to take shape, Wales embarked on its most dramatic transformation yet. Let your mind rest as we explore how a country rooted in coal and steel reinvented itself for the modern age, facing both tremendous challenges and unexpected opportunities. The immediate post-war years brought the creation of the welfare state, and Wales was one of its greatest beneficiaries. The National Health Service, established in 1948, was pioneered by Aneurin Bevan, a Welsh miner's son who would become one of Britain's most influential politicians. The NHS brought modern medical care to every Welsh community, regardless of ability to pay, while expanded education opportunities allowed talented young Welsh people to pursue careers that had been unthinkable for their parents. But the economic foundation of modern Wales was crumbling. The coal industry, which had employed hundreds of thousands of Welsh workers, began its long decline as Britain shifted to oil and natural gas. Mine after mine closed, taking with them not just jobs, but entire communities built around coal production. The Aberfan disaster of 1966, when a coal waste tip collapsed and killed 144 people, mostly children, became a symbol of both the dangers of the old industrial economy and the need for change. The response to industrial decline was remarkably creative. Wales began to attract new industries, electronics, automotive, aerospace, that brought different kinds of jobs and different approaches to work. The development of the M4 motorway connected Wales more closely to London and the rest of Europe, while new universities and research institutions helped create a more educated workforce. This economic transformation coincided with a cultural renaissance. The 1960s and 1970s saw an explosion of creativity in Welsh music, literature, and visual arts. Welsh rock bands like Man and Budgie gained international followings, while Welsh-language pop music developed its own distinctive sound and audience. Television played a crucial role in this cultural revival. The campaign for a Welsh-language television channel became a major political issue in the 1970s, with language activists using civil disobedience and even hunger strikes to press their demands. The establishment of S4C, Siano Pedwar Cymru, in 1982 provided a platform for Welsh-language programming that reached audiences throughout Wales and helped create new forms of Welsh cultural expression. Political changes were equally dramatic. The creation of the Welsh Office in 1964 gave Wales its own government department, while the discovery of North Sea oil raised questions about Scotland's and Wales's place within the United Kingdom. The 1979 referendum on Welsh devolution was decisively defeated, but it established the principle that constitutional change was possible and began a debate that would continue for decades. The 1980s brought new challenges as the conservative government of Margaret Thatcher accelerated the closure of traditional industries while promoting free market policies that hit Wales particularly hard. The miners' strike of 1984 to 85 became a bitter conflict over the future direction of British society, with Welsh mining communities at the center of the struggle. Yet even during this difficult period, Welsh culture continued to flourish. The popularity of Welsh male voice choirs spread around the world, becoming a symbol of Welsh identity that transcended political boundaries. Welsh writers like Jan Morris and Amir Humphreys gained international recognition, while Welsh actors like Anthony Hopkins and Catherine Zeta-Jones brought Welsh talent to global audiences. The 1990s brought new hope. The economic transformation of Wales began to show results as new industries took root and unemployment fell. The revival of Cardiff as a European capital city, complete with a new bay development and cultural facilities, symbolized Wales's growing confidence in its ability to compete in the modern world. The election of a Labour government in 1997 opened the door to constitutional change that had been blocked for decades. The second referendum on Welsh devolution passed by the narrowest of margins, just 50.3% to 49.7%. But it was enough to establish the National Assembly for Wales and begin a new chapter in Welsh political development. As the 20th century ended, Wales had achieved something remarkable. It had successfully transitioned from a 19th century industrial economy to a 21st century service and technology economy, while maintaining its distinctive cultural identity. Welsh was still spoken by about 500,000 people. Welsh cultural institutions were thriving, and Wales had its own democratic government for the first time in over 600 years. As we reach the end of our journey through Welsh history, let your mind rest in the present moment, in a Wales that honors its past while embracing its future. The Wales of today is both ancient and modern, rooted in traditions that stretch back millennia yet engage with challenges and opportunities that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. The National Assembly for Wales, which began meeting in 1999, has gradually acquired more powers and responsibilities, becoming the Welsh Parliament Senedd Cymru in 2020. This evolution from administrative devolution to legislative devolution to something approaching home rule represents the fulfillment of dreams that Welsh politicians have pursued for over a century. Modern Wales faces the same challenges as other developed societies: globalization, technological change, environmental concerns, demographic shifts, but approaches them with distinctively Welsh solutions. The Welsh government has pioneered innovative approaches to sustainable development, social welfare, and education that are studied and admired around the world. The Welsh language has experienced a remarkable revival, supported by government policy, educational innovation, and popular enthusiasm. Young Welsh people today are more likely to be bilingual than their parents, and Welsh language culture is more vibrant and creative than it has been for generations. Welsh music, literature, and media reach global audiences, while remaining rooted in Welsh soil. Wales's relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom remains complex but stable. Brexit has raised new questions about Wales's place in Europe and the world, but has also demonstrated the maturity and effectiveness of Welsh democratic institutions. Whatever the future holds, Wales now has the political tools and cultural confidence to shape its own destiny. The story of Wales is ultimately a story of survival and adaptation, of a small nation that has maintained its identity through conquest and integration, industrialization and deindustrialization, depression and prosperity. It is a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of communities that refuse to give up, of a culture that found ways to flourish even under the most difficult circumstances. As you drift into peaceful sleep, remember that you are part of this continuing story. Whether you are Welsh by birth or by choice, by ancestry or by affinity, you carry within you the dreams and struggles of all those who came before, the Celtic warriors and Roman settlers, the medieval princes and Norman lords, the Methodist preachers and industrial workers, the poets and politicians who built modern Wales. The mountains of Snowdonia still rise majestically above the valleys where your ancestors lived and worked. The Irish Sea still washes the shores where Vikings once landed and from which Welsh emigrants set out for new worlds. The language that the druids spoke still echoes in schools and homes across Wales, carrying forward the wisdom and beauty of countless generations. Sleep now and dream of Wales, not just the Wales of history, but the Wales of tomorrow, still being written by each new generation. Dream of the small country that has given the world so much, its songs and stories, its principles and passions, its stubborn refusal to disappear into a homogenizing tide of modernity. Dream of Wales, and wake tomorrow ready to add your own verse to this ancient and ever-continuing song.